Hello, Culture Matters podcast. Boy, am I excited today. We have a special treat because of one of our great friends of the Culture Matters podcast introduced us to someone very special. Before I introduce them, here's a quote just for this episode. A hero is someone who has given his or her life to something bigger than oneself. Joseph Campbell, our
Mhm.
guest today, is not only a student of the great Joseph Campbell, but a mentor, an advisor, a teacher of founders maturing into the chief executive officer, the leaders of great organizations. They have a background that spans companies you definitely heard of, from MGM to Sony and beyond. They actually, as far as I can tell, and we're going to learn about this today, did an early dissertation on bringing video to the market a long time ago, if I understand correctly. But they've been in organizational leadership roles and coaching leaders of organizations for now decades. And I'll add one of our favorite guests, Norman Rosenthal. Episode 291 introduced us to our guest, David Bishop, founder, leader of the David Bishop Group. Thanks so much for coming on the Culture Runners podcast. I'm very excited to tap into leadership, culture, and so much more. Some Campbell too. I was preparing and like, oh my God, you love, or you talk, so much about Campbell. So yeah, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy to be here and thankful that you invited me.
And one thing is, when you were in school and this is a time where this is before Netflix, before
Mhm.
even DVDs, and
Yeah,
before really everything.
yeah.
Did you consider yourself someone that with vision at that time, or was that just because it seems like a vision oriented thing to think, steps ahead. You were you
Yeah.
in while you were in school. This is before running, larger
Yeah.
companies.
Yeah, so yeah, no, I mean I think I got at the beginning of a trend, sort of rode a wave early on. So I don't necessarily consider myself a visionary at that point in time. Later, as I got some more experience under my belt, I definitely was a part of, a group of a handful of executives who really kind of saw the next wave, if you will, and where things were heading, and started to lean into that transition and into those innovations that ultimately moved the home entertainment experience further along.
Did it happen fast or did it happen slow, then really fast all at once?
Yeah, I would say like anything, there were periods of accelerated growth, and then there'd be long periods of plateau, and then more accelerated growth. So, early on, I guess I got involved in as it was called then, the home video uh, movement, if you will,
Yeah.
back in the early 80s. And then it was really new at that time. And it was a series of entrepreneurs, everything from, you know, so individuals who put their life savings into opening up, what now seems like a clunky consumer experience around, renting VHS and Betamax tapes. Um, so that was really accelerated
What was
growth.
MGM's like value proposition at that time? Because that's a strong brand for like I grew up
Yeah,
like see MGM.
yeah, yeah.
What was the value prop in the beginning and how did that metamorphosize?
Yeah, I mean, it was always built on content, right? So,
Oh,
MGM at that time had, both a decent sized new release business, but also a massive library that helped fuel the growth of the company, but also the growth of the industry. Um, because we had classics in the library like The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind and
Wow.
all the MGM musicals and the James Bond series. So
Yeah.
it was rich in content and ultimately, that when you pair it with um, a meaningful technology change really helped move the industry forward and away from not away from but it augmented the experiences that people already had, right? So they
Well,
had
because was it because prior to so the video at home, it was just only us individuals going to these theaters. That
yeah.
was all that the option was.
Well,
Well,
theater, yeah, it was theaters and broadcast TV, right? So you would, you would experience in the theaters, and then ultimately it would be, available on NBC,
later, and
ABC later. Yeah,
wow.
yeah,
But then what was the time period when that exactly went to now? Okay, now there's a home video. I can actually get this video myself and
yeah,
bring it to my house. But I had to go somewhere else that wasn't a movie theater. I had to go somewhere
yeah.
like
Yeah.
yeah, when was that? That's fascinating. Like because that even itself is like that was a big shift in the world at the time.
Yeah. And it's funny to me to hear you say that now because now like the concept of people having to go to a
It's
store
unbelievable,
or
really.
building
Yeah, it's
to pick up a piece of packaged media and then take it home, that seems something that's antiquated. And in reality, it is because now you can just sit with your remote and stream something, or if you want to own it, download it. So yeah, there's been really monumental change in the home entertainment environment.
but it's fascinating to me. Like it's so much to learn about human beings in the sense
Yeah.
that because then if we were so used to going to these institutions to
Mm,
see it,
yeah.
and there was this shift that you were on the early, you were in it of when we
Yeah.
actually had to go to a different place to go and then bring it back to it. It's like leaving our cave to go get, food and then come back to the cave versus
Right.
going hanging out in somebody
Yeah.
else's cave. And it's
Yeah.
like if we want to understand the future of where things are going, I wonder what we can learn from that period in history. You mentioned that there was the executives figuring out like, all right, what was next? What are some things that stuck out at the time that you guys thought, okay, this is the move to go into? Because you're one of the early adopters, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Like what
Yeah.
stuck out to you? What was like so obvious to you? Or
Yeah. Well, uh, for more than a decade, we were sort of in an environment where it was mostly this kind of rental experience that you described, and we were, also trying to make a shift into ownership, right? To get consumers to actually own and collect movies, which, opened up additional retail channels for us because then suddenly places like Best Buy and Walmart and other key retailers would take our content in. And that started to, we would look at different pricing models to try to encourage the
mm,
ownership. And then it was really after we saw, what the music industry did with compact disc and saw, okay, well, there's a 5-inch disc and people um are moving towards, buying new playback devices and in by playing back CDs that there was then a shift to say, okay, how do we do this? How do we replicate that? And how do we further shift the the rental experience to more of a purchase experience, right? Because it's easier on the consumer,
yeah,
and certainly there's a margin play for the studios as well that was appealing, right?
mm,
So the what to give credit where credit is due, there was kind of one individual who was leading the charge on this. There's a guy named Warren Lieberfarb, who was at Warner Brothers, and uh, and he was a catalyst. And then, you know, if he was kind of the George Washington, if you will, then
Wow.
there was a subset of us who were definitely the part of the founding fathers as well
Wow.
of the movement. So so we definitely leaned into that innovation and opened up channels and again opened up our checkbooks and our libraries
Wow.
to support that change.
Um, um, was it true that Sony acquired MGM at some point?
Kind of. It was actually led by a couple of private equity companies, and they partnered with Sony. Um, and and so the private equity company came in and then uh, had a deal with Sony where the distribution rights would move over to Sony. And yeah, so that was back in early 2000, I guess 2003
Are
maybe.
there any leadership insights that reflect upon that were stuck out to you at that time? Because that it's a time of
Yeah.
transition in and of
Yeah,
itself.
it was an interesting, because I moved over to Sony after that period of time. And we're going to talk about leadership and culture and engagement levels and things like that. Um, but you know what I experienced at MGM was really kind of building a company from the ground up,
Yeah.
right? So we started with maybe, you know, 30 people in a conference room and then grew to 3,000 with offices
Whoa.
all over the world. And in hindsight, the benefit of that is that create the you can create the culture, right? And you select the people to bring into this culture that you're trying to create. And um, and it's easier to sort of keep that thing going, right? As long as you stay strategically aligned as an
Mm,
organization, right? Um, the the thing that was harder in moving to Sony is I inherited a highly centralized organization with few decision makers, and and it was my opinion and experience that that's not the way to create kind of a thriving organization. That you really need to have a system that allows people to participate, to make appropriate level decisions, and it was easy to go in with that message, but it was hard to kind of reframe and rebuild the culture.
mm,
Ultimately, we did. Uh,
wow.
and when I got there, I'm a big believer in employee engagement studies. I think it helps to set a tone for the organization and also for the leadership team as well, right? If they know they're going
Yeah.
to get measured on certain things, then they tend to kind of shift behaviors to align their leadership style with that.
For those that aren't familiar, what is an employee engagement study?
Yeah, so I mean when I started employee engagement studies, I used to ask like three questions. What do you really love about this place?
Oh,
And what sucks? Right.
that's
I,
awesome.
I didn't I wasn't that blunt in the way I phrased
Yeah, I'm
it.
not sure if Stalin wanted to know.
So,
That's great.
but it became more elaborate and more detailed as we go along. But it asks questions to really kind of uncover how am I being treated as an employee? Does my opinion matter, right? Is this an environment that supports psychological safety? Do we have an organization that is rowing in the right direction, right? Or everybody is rowing together. So it starts to really uncover that by asking a series of questions that everybody gets to give their opinion on, right? And do it in a safe way. It's
Mm,
completely anonymous. And again, at the end of that, you get to see how engaged your organization is.
mm.
Um, and what I found was that if you have a highly engaged organization, then financial results usually follow.
Why do you think they follow? What?
Because I think people, one, there's there's untapped genius in the people that you bring in an organization, right? So they can innovate, they can if they're able to kind of lean in, they're just more productive, right? And they get more things done rather if they're in an environment where they're afraid to make a decision, right? Or just protecting their jobs. So there's a lot of logic to that, or at least from my perspective, but still, there's so many people who don't get that.
Wow. Back to the, 30, the 30 employees, right? That's
Mm.
MGM at the time, is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Was there a difference like where's the J curve in that in the sense of 30 to 500 or 30 to 100? Is that 500 to 1,000? What or is it?
Yeah. It was definitely in stages. So yeah, so early on we kind of outsourced the part of the distribution that we knew was too quick for us to handle, right? So you know, we were in the US and we knew we could handle that and scale appropriately
Yeah.
to address all the needs of our customers and be able to have high levels of you know customer performance and meet expectations there. So then Canada was the next area where we went towards, then Europe, and then the rest of world.
Was it a culture shock working in other countries,
Uh,
or is it more now than then, you think?
yeah, yeah. I mean, there are definitely cultural differences, right? And you have to be aware of that and attuned to that. Um, and there's a lot that's the same, right? So, ultimately we were selling movies and TV shows.
Mm,
And there's certainly some nuance in how you deal with the customers um, and how you approach them, and you have to be kind of sensitive to that. Um, but ultimately, James Bond is James Bond, and
Oh
it's
yeah, what do you think the important was at the time of why the organization was in business or what purpose it provided to the marketplace, to the customers, to the marketplace? Was that a regular thing discussed in
yeah. We
one
I mean we
way or another?
definitely yeah. I mean no, we definitely had a vision of who we wanted to become to
Mm,
the customers. Um, and we did want to have a level of world-class performance. So we would focus on that. We would measure that. We
wow.
we would seek out you know, retailer awards for customer service
Like
when,
recognition?
yeah, exactly.
What
Exactly.
yeah, what does the lack of recognition do to a team in your view?
Yeah, well, I mean the lack of recognition, keeps you short of your vision. But the theory going. going in was if the customer rewards you in with high levels of performance, right?
Mm,
Um, so you know, because of that, we felt okay, we can get a disproportionate amount of space at retail. We can uh, and we can get reap financial rewards because of that. There's also kind of a half joking theory from people who did not get awarded this, that, oh, if you get the award, that means you gave up more of your profits to the retailer than other competitors did. But
mm.
um, but we, like to look at performance metrics in a way that supported our vision of high levels of customer performance.
What are some of the elements that are, early on even that you think led to team camaraderie, like, or team group, like cohesion that you exuded as a leader of people?
Yeah. Well, again, it's having um, it's having a central purpose, right? Having something that people feel like this is important work that I feel good about getting up in the morning
Mm.
for, right? And that's a combination of sort of, mission and vision, but also a value system underneath that, right? Oh, this is a good place to work, and I know that I have a sense of teamwork, and there's some trust that the organization has in me, and I'm also capable of innovating and contributing to innovation. And actually, those three things that I just mentioned,
Teamwork, trust, innovation.
that was that was our cultural value system.
Was it as explicit as it is today with values on the wall, or was it more implicit, unsaid,
No,
or
it was
just
definitely it was
said?
definitely yeah, it was definitely something that was stated, was written on the wall and written in other places, and more importantly, lived and reinforced, right? Because in the work I do now,
Hmm.
sometimes I
Yep.
work with organizations who build mission, vision, values, and then they put the values on the wall and then they never reinforce them, right? So it's almost like it's an exercise and it's like, oh yeah, yeah, I remember that that's our value system. But if you're not coming back to them all the time, ad nauseum almost, then they don't
Yeah.
really kind of seep into the
How,
organization.
how do you do that? What are some advice you have for the leaders listening to this that they want to have that culture, that team cohesion?
Yeah.
They're unsure of how to actually do it without coming across like one of these, documentary,
Yeah, 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 kind of a cult
right? Yeah.
leader.
Yeah, documentary in the wrong way or too far one
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, again, it's if you're going to change a culture, you need to measure it, right? So for instance, if you were hanging on to the three values that I mentioned, that you can simply ask the question in your annual employee engagement study, do you feel a sense of trust in the organization? Do you feel
Mm,
your ideas are listened to, right? Um, and and so you can measure it in that way. The other is to call, as a leader, to call it out when you see it happen, right? So when you see like there was an idea that came from, and the office in Tokyo that resonated as an idea that we could
mm.
spread globally. When you do an all hands meeting, say, here's a prime example where ideas can come from anywhere in this organization. So, um, so it's really kind of catching people doing something right and also and messaging it throughout, but also measuring it
Hmm.
to make sure that people really are feeling it and living it.
How about team meetings? If our listeners we know that are in a position of management really want to just waste a ton of time in a meeting or undermine a team meeting, what are some, if we were to invert, some things not to do in team meetings to really slow things down? Would you have like
Yeah.
a do not, thou shall not list that comes to
Yeah,
mind over the
yeah,
years?
that well, and that was really kind of a pet peeve of mine that people tend there was a tendency when I got to Sony to feel like a productive day was when you had a day where you had a day of all meetings, right? Oh, I had so many meetings. What a great day. And
Yeah.
and almost to the point, at the end of the meeting was, well, we need to have another meeting about this. And so, there was a decision that that
Funny.
that I made or we made as a leadership team where we actually had a day where people were prohibited from having any meetings.
Wait, but what do people do outside of meetings? Like what? No, I'm just kidding. What is there actually to do outside of meeting? I would like to understand that part. Like, what are you actually doing? Um,
Yeah, no, I mean, there's
because that can
sell
get
things, make
yeah,
sure that
we should
things show up on
make this
time.
simple for the audience. Like what can't, because a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs that get stuck in that, because I know we're going to talk about the hero's journey as well, but like
Yeah, yeah,
maybe it's a founder that now there is an enterprise where it was just them
yeah,
selling
yeah,
like for a while, and maybe
yeah,
they had a couple employees,
yeah,
but now it's like bigger than them. So
yeah,
like how, in some serious sense, yeah, what is there to do outside of meetings if I'm a founder of a company and now I've got a lot more than just me and a couple people and some customers I liked and I
yeah,
touched and felt like, because you went from 30 to 3,000. I mean, that's unbelievable. So yeah,
yeah.
what are some things that we could do outside of meeting?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that was interesting that you alluded to was this really kind of, founder transition that they have to go through, which is really painful, right? Because they do go from a small organization, it could be five, it could be 10, but they're at that time, they're in the middle of everything, right? Every decision kind of flows through them. And when they shift to be a larger or mid-sized organization of 50 or 500, and that sense of them being in the middle of everything suddenly becomes viewed as micromanagement, right?
Mm,
And they know they have to get out of that mode, but it's difficult for them to get out of that mode because they feel like a sense of loss and maybe not needed as much. And the reality is they need to get out of that detail, right? And I like to use the phrase I got from somewhere, some book I read, to get off the dance floor and into the balcony, right?
mm,
Because it's in the balcony where you can start to see the patterns of the organization and what's happening on the dance floor and make the corrections from there. But when you're in it, you can't see the whole thing, right? And that's a really challenging shift, behavioral shift that founders have to make that sometimes they
mm.
can't. Um,
Yeah, what are some, is that behavioral in your studies, your experience? Is it environment? Is it genes? Is it free will? Is it like, or is that the unanswerable question in your mind?
Yeah, no, I think it's somewhat answerable. I mean, there's been a lot of uh, studies around emotional intelligence, right? Um, and what the studies show is, yeah, there are certain things about us that are hardwired or somewhat hardwired. Emotional intelligence is not one of those things, right? An individual can change, an individual can be more more compassionate, more empathetic, and those are things that serves the leader well as they make this transition along the way, right? Um, but I mean, to your point, there are some people who just can't let go of that early style of leadership that is it's necessary, right?
Mm.
In that period where they are a founder, because they do carry the vision, right? And they are the company evangelists, and it was their idea in a lot of cases. So and they know where the thing is going, and they know where they want to drive it. Um, but as the organization gets bigger, you need a different style of leadership, and sometimes you need to kind of dip back into that
That
founders.
was going to be a question. That's great.
Yeah.
If you could unpack that, because let's say that I'm in the balcony. I was once dancing. People saw me dancing. How often or how should I approach just uh, memorializing the fact that at one time I was able to dance, so that people can
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
keep remember that I did, or I'm still capable, or don't
Yeah.
start doubting that I
Yeah.
once did dance.
And
Like,
yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily it's more out of need within the organization, right? It's not
okay.
going back to proving that, oh yeah, I was the engineer that designed this thing and I know I can dig in and really fix this problem that you have, right? But you know, sometimes an organization gets stuck and may need that founder mentality, that strong sense of innovation and capability to really kind of get the organization unstuck, right? So that's where having both styles in your toolbox is important. And it doesn't mean you abandon one
Mm.
for the other, but um, you know, you have to know when it's appropriate to use that tool to again get people moving in the right direction.
What role does strategy play in the larger enterprises as it
Yeah.
yeah, in contrast to maybe in the beginning, very, very, very early stages of a
Yeah. Yeah.
startup to enterprise?
That's a great question because um, you know, strategic alignment, I think, is really a critical area for any leader to focus on, right? Because that if you're clear about the strategies, about what people should be working on,
Mm,
then you can do less day-to-day oversight, right? Because you know if it's embedded and you're reinforcing it
mm.
and you're a mirror for the you know, for the productivity around those, say, five strategies or whatever you come up with, then everyone is pushing towards the same thing, right?
Is there and like you mentioned like five, is there something significant to that, or is that more just
Yeah, no,
arbitrary?
I mean, you know, in
There's a lot of nuance.
yeah, and this was, you know, something I learned over time because you know, there was a period where I was guilty of chasing the next shiny object, right? And uh, you know, I actually had an employee one time who came to me with a list of all the initiatives that I had started, and it was
That's
overwhelming.
awesome.
And and actually there was
Wow.
a box on my desk that I used to keep that list in to remind myself that okay, you gotta pick the most important things. And so we as a leadership team, we would do that and refine that list as needed. And then that was the the notion around what the company should be, what the organization should be. and the messaging that we pushed out to the rest of the
Mm.
team.
What roles does asking questions have uh, in the management of people? Like,
Yeah, yeah, that's another great question. And and I think if you're going to truly empower your senior team and their employees, creating a style that asks more questions than give answers is an important seed or seeds to plant to really help people grow. And one of the things I learned when I shifted from being an
mm,
organizational leader to an organizational coach is that if you ask powerful questions and um, you get people to kind of think what the solution might be and have ownership around the solution, then they feel better and they're more apt uh, to really push the action further, right? Because
yeah,
they
yeah.
came up with the solution and it wasn't, oh, my boss told me to do this. You know what I mean?
Mm.
That's a whole different dynamic.
How about like was there a large percentage of people that grew with the let's go to NGM, right? That 30
Yeah,
to 3,000,
yeah,
a
yeah,
large percentage that grew with that organization over
yeah,
that decade period.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, a lot of the growth came from within. Um, we didn't we didn't lose a lot of people
Wow,
when that was growing. And the best thing for me was when we did lose somebody who went to another company and then they came back or they wanted to
really?
come back. I would and there might be some that might say, "Oh no, you left, so you can't come back." To me, that was a statement to say, "Look, you might think the grass is greener, but it's pretty lush where you are." And so that
Hmm,
those people who did do that, and there were definitely a couple, um, to me
hmm.
became advertisements, if you will, that hey, this is a unique culture, and just recognize that and be grateful for that.
Let's say that people there are harsh consequences for leaving, like closed door policy. What type of consequences to the organization do you think could occur long term? So the opposite of that. Someone leaves, they're not welcome back. What do you think the consequences could be of that?
Um, yeah, I mean, I don't, yeah, I don't know. I mean, you might. If you're an employee, and I'm just kind of thinking through this, the you might send a message that, okay, hey, you better not leave because if you leave, you're not coming back, and I would never want an environment where people felt trapped, right? That there was
Yeah,
consequence,
yeah,
that there was
yeah. It
consequence
sounds terrible. Yeah.
them
Uh,
leaving. So I would much prefer to say, hey, our intention is to make the best place that you ever worked. And if it's not, then that's something that we should take in and we should learn from and grow from that. Right. So
and you're saying because uh, a consequence of people being able to come back if they did leave, you're saying it actually had an effect where people would bring great people back
yeah, yeah, exactly. And they would bring
if
their
they came
story
back.
and they would bring their stories back, to say, oh yeah, this maybe this company uh, had better product or more content than us, but you know what? I didn't thrive the way I did
Hmm.
here. And then uh, so then that becomes a celebration for the culture in the process.
And then look at our culture today. Obviously, things shift, or change. Does they change? Do they repeat? I don't know. But it's statistically, it's being said that the average employee is moving multiple times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
how much of this is companies? How much of this is companies reacting to the generational differences? What are
Yeah.
ways that a company can combat this shift?
Yeah.
Or your thoughts on that? It seems the reason I bring this up is it seems to be that's an even more valuable. You said I'm going to use one of your values. You said team, trust, and innovation.
Right.
So I think I'm building trust with the employee if they leave and they can come back. Because if they
Yeah.
did have a bad experience somewhere else, they come
Yeah.
back. Now they
Mm.
really trust me.
Yeah.
So nowadays people are moving around more than ever,
Yeah.
statistically.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it seems more valuable than ever to be able to build that.
Yeah.
So, but how do we combat this generational shift as it relates?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like one of your advantages in that company was
Mm.
that people they grew together, and I can
Yeah.
imagine the
Yeah.
relationships that were
Hmm.
and the marriages and the kids and who knows what. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, um, it is a complex issue. I mean, to your first point, yeah, if you create a great place to work where people feel that they contribute, that they have a purpose, then they're more apt to stay. And I worked on a project during the pandemic with Harvard's Institute of Coaching, and
wow.
we interviewed I don't know, like 35 leaders around the world during the pandemic, and and of course the pandemic, pushed everyone remote. Suddenly, geography wasn't an issue, and so everyone, literally could reach to their keyboard and look for another job. And what we found in that study that the leaders who leaned into the purpose of the organization, the employees were less apt to leave, right? So the the employees of this generation are really purpose driven, right? When they feel that they have a purpose that connects with them, then they're going to stay, right? The issue is also gets complex because, in the millennial generation, they they want growth, you know, and individual growth.
Mm.
So, and sometimes if you're in a mature business, that's hard to give everyone. And that's where, I think in terms
Do
of
you mean career growth? Because
career growth, yeah,
the
career.
per annum growth is less because it's bigger.
Yeah,
Is that sense?
yeah, exactly. So in some ways, um, I think it's fine that that people, are looking outside for kind of the next growth opportunity for themselves, right? And uh, in my generation, it was sort of more about stability than it was about frequently moving around. Um,
Wow.
so, but if you don't, but if you're in an organization that is not supportive and not psychologically safe and not
Wow.
attentive to the individual's growth, then you're just going to spur that movement and that shift away from your team.
I want to unpack this psychological safety because it's been brought up to my attention by some of our listeners, and
Yeah.
I was introduced to that term last year by some of the listeners. What
Yeah.
is psychological safety? Where did you come into contact with that?
Yeah. So, really, um, it's the the employee, whether it's the senior team or someone who's just coming into the company, want to feel like they have the ability to express themselves, to offer up a differing opinion without retribution, right? And without being, yelled at or just, saying your opinion doesn't matter, I'll tell you what's right, that they want to, even though they all know at a certain level it's not, everything's not up for a vote, right? That the CEO ultimately makes the call. Um, they want to know that a differing opinion is okay, right? And that they can be heard, and again, without penalty.
Without penalty.
Yeah, and the other part of that is, um, that they're not constantly under pressure that if they make a mistake, then there's also going to be retribution, right? So, um, all of us make mistakes. And if you
Interesting.
continue to make the same mistake like over and over again, then of course you should not have the job anymore. But you should also be in an environment where if you really put through a good effort, you thought it through, and you know what, you just went this way when you should have gone that way, and that individual can learn from that and be better for that. That's, another example where it could be a psychologically safe environment or it
Mm.
could fail in that regard.
It's interesting because maybe, and just would love your thoughts on this. Like maybe, in a past generations with less information, less in turn opportunity, uh, more necessity for stability, the individual might maintain the job out of accountability or responsibility as a consequence to like their family, their needs, their
Yeah,
basic
yeah,
needs,
yeah,
and
yeah,
there'd be a lesser pressure for the authorities, but by which they work for and with, to
yeah,
treat them with respect. I'm just going to keep it simple, like
yeah,
to even respect them, like to treat them as human beings as
yeah,
opposed to
yeah,
means to end. Because in some sense,
yeah,
um, it's a means to an end in the sense that we're working together for an outcome. Like I
yeah,
want to do the best possible job to learn from this conversation for the outcome that the quality is as good as possible. And
right.
like, um, so there's anyway, but I love your thoughts on that. Like past generations, less information available,
Yeah,
less opportunity in turn. I might just grit my teeth, show up. Oh, I don't like the way I'm being talked to, but I can develop pride in what I do. I have my own personal why, like feed my depression era children or something,
yeah,
or
yeah, 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 yeah,
World War II children. So I'm curious
yeah.
your thoughts on
Yeah,
on that.
I think there's definitely, uh something that you allude to in that comment is and it's more true now, in the kind of the post-pandemic sort of hybrid world we live in, that the employee has just way more options, right? And your earlier point is more about, okay, well, there wasn't as much access to information or access to jobs, and therefore the leadership team can get a little bit lazy about, really kind of, um, being concerned about what the employee thinks or feels or how engaged they are, because they could take the opinion like, oh, if you don't like it, go out and get another job, and good luck with that, finding a job that has, these benefits in this pay scale. Um, so so I definitely get that point and hear that point, and there's a lot of truth to that, I guess.
Yeah, like oh, another question I have though is the oh, because so one of the notes I had here was so psychological safety, different opinion without retribution, and of course, like the ability to make mistakes, with lesser consequence. So there's that respect conversation. So the people are entitled as a consequence of more information, more opportunity. How do we
Yeah.
balance personal responsibility in this equation as it relates to, for example, uh, well, hey, this the person isn't really putting in the work that they're expecting all these. out because it's a yeah, like how
Yeah.
do we balance the entitlement and the
Yeah,
personal
yeah.
responsibility?
No, I think, with this kind of responsibility and this ability to make decisions, there has to be a certain amount of accountability that's that's in that mix, right? So it's not to say that, oh yeah, just hire somebody and they make like 18 mistakes a day and that's okay. As long as
We're all
as long
driving to the purpose.
as right, if somebody's not performing, then it's a disservice to the rest of the team that is.
It's like
If
you're
you
getting the recognition for trying. Like,
yeah,
wow, you
yeah,
tried so well.
yeah. I showed up so should get a trophy,
Yeah.
which
You tried to get to work on time. Here's your token. Or
yeah,
so
yeah,
it's
yeah,
funny, but
exactly,
I just
exactly.
think it's opaque. It's opaque. So like, how do you distinguish between accountability and responsibility or like for example, you mentioned earlier about maybe we can unpack this, the values on the wall and written down on the wall, what have you, explicit, yet maybe not acted out in real time. You've seen situations where they're talked about, but it's not really what's happening or going on. So what
Yeah,
is that? What can that do when it's not really going on to the relationship between the people and the management?
yeah. I know that it creates underperformance. There was the notion of quiet quitting,
Oh,
during
yeah.
the pandemic, which, again, going back to that study I mentioned, um, we did find that people could just shut down a bit or do the minimum, right? And do enough to keep the job and keep the paycheck, but also not put in the work,
Mm,
right? Um, so that's where this notion of engagement, and again, it's important to separate the difference between like engagement and people feeling happy. It's um, because you can find that, oh well, people like to come to work because they like the people there, or they like to hang out with them or go to lunch, right? That's not engagement. That that's people
yeah.
creating a sense of community, which is important, but it's not about them really kind of leaning into the work and feeling appreciated for the work that they do.
Yeah, when I think of the word engagement, I think of like I was engaged before I was married. I went out of my way. I got I asked for permission. I got a
Yeah, yeah,
ring, and then I made a commitment, and I
yeah,
decided this, from there there was no one else involved.
yeah. And then you got married and you put your feet up and you say, it's
Yeah, we don't want yeah, and then the real work starts. So like
yeah, yeah,
yeah, I'm
yeah,
curious what role customer service, the customers play into this in our current business world, because it's like the Peter Drucker quote from long, 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 seems like forever ago. The purpose of a business is to create and keep a customer. I think that's the
yeah,
quote.
yeah,
The
yeah, yeah.
purpose of a business is to create and keep a customer. Is that, in your view, what are your thoughts in this generation? Do we need to rewrite the quote? Is it,
Yeah.
you know, what are your thoughts?
No, I think that holds true. I mean, that is a truism that existed forever in in business, right? If you're not um, exceeding customer expectations, then someone else will,
That's
right?
good.
And
Yep.
then they'll take your business away. So there's certain companies that can get away with that for a while when there's no other alternative. But then
Mm.
as soon as there's another alternative, then they'll move on, right? So there's there's no change in that quote, and I think you can just memorialize it and etch it in stone, and that'll be true 100 years from now. So
The did now early on you studied business administration. So was your vision in your life to end up, running a giant company like that, or did you expect some other alternative? Because I think it was what, Cherry Hill, you went into a music store or something, and then all of a sudden, handful of years later, you're running this company. So, but you studied business. So I'm curious, where was the inspiration
yeah, no,
to study business and
yeah, so yeah, it was always kind of a rung at a time, right? So as you reference, I started wanting to be in the music industry and took a class at Temple University about the business of music, and I always had it and still have a deep passion for music. So I thought, oh, that would be pretty cool to, if music was my work, right?
wow.
So then the people who were teaching that class said, okay, well, there's a couple ways you can go. You can go via retail, and so that's the route that I went. And then it was like, oh, well, I can become manager of this store, after working in the back room, and I became manager, and then it was then the whole like home video thing shifted.
Wow.
Friends of mine who were working at music companies got uh, recruited into that industry, and then I followed. So then it was like, okay, well, now I'm a regional. Oh, there's somebody who's head of sales. Maybe I could be head of sales, So um, it
Oh.
was very much that level. And then you get to that level and you look around and say, oh, now I can reach for this rock.
Yeah, what
So
advice would you have for this generation that's listening that wants the fast track? Uh, because I just had a call today. It was talked about like there's less people going the Goldman route in this generation than maybe other routes because it's like, all right, I'm 22. Am I going to look, where I'll be at 36?
yeah,
People are less long-term oriented potentially. So, but
yeah,
as it relates to working one's way up the ladder in the executive ladder, what are
yeah.
some things that you would advise people to do to if they do want that career? Because it seems like if they do, there's a big opportunity if people are not as patient or are not as willing to think, or to look up in the next rung or
Yeah, yeah. I mean, staying with that theme, it is about really getting clear about what that next rung looks like, right? And what aligns with your gut and your purpose as a human, right? But you have to be clear-eyed on what it is that
Mm.
that you want, and be uh, habitual about, coming back to that goal and that vision that you have for yourself, and that drives action, right?
um how about education? What role did that play in your ability to continue leading and managing, like
Uh,
informally, even before? Because you did even further education later, I want to unpack. But
yeah,
like, did you read books, business books throughout, or was it was
yeah,
it
yeah,
mentors? Like, what was that like to keep
yeah,
keep
uh,
growing and keep learning?
yeah. So yeah, I mean the educational piece was I found I was complementary to what I was doing in in the real world, right? So I didn't do a traditional path where I went like full time and then went on full time in my MBA. I was like I did a part-time MBA, and I was working full time, but I was able to use what I learned
Mm.
in the real world and be able to apply those concepts, or at least understand those concepts. So and I wouldn't say that the degree itself helped me, but the knowledge that I gained and the experience that I gained from that um, was foundational.
Yeah, why is it? The reason I ask this is because a lot of the listeners are being told on different social platforms and things to just like not take, education, that's a distraction or like, but how did it help you? What's the power of information? Because we're a big proponent on the show of like, there's an academy I've been doing virtually
Yeah.
and taking courses and things. And so, but
Yes.
not everyone's exposed to that. Or a lot of on the Instagrams and Facebooks, there are people that are in the small business worlds promoting, anti-education or not
Mhm,
taking
mhm, mhm.
taking classes. So what do you think is, Francis Bacon said, knowledge is power. So like,
Yeah.
what's your take on that? And
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I sometimes get the point. I mean, there are really wealthy people who started down a down a path of education and then got in and had a great idea, like a Bill Gates or Zuckerberg or those people who just said school's a waste of time. I got this fantastic idea. I should chase it, right? And if you do, and that's your passion, that's what you should do. And there's a lot of experience learned by doing, right?
yep.
But also the education can broaden your view, right? So if you're in an MBA program, you're oftentimes working on case studies or learning about other industries and businesses that other outside of that you might just be kind of myopic and looking at the path that you're on. So um, so they can really be
Mm,
complementary if played right. If it's just okay, well, I got to tick this box so that I can then be an MBA and then go on to my career. Um, it's rare that that matters unless you're at, one of the really top schools. If you talk to recruiters, sometimes the master's degree is important. Oftentimes it's more about the experience, and it's only really, really valuable if you come from one of the top schools. It's still
mm.
that carries weight. If if you go to one of the Ivy League schools or one of the top business schools like Stanford or whatever, then then that can matter in the jobs that you get. Again, if you're a founder with
Mm.
this drive and you're ready to accept that call to adventure, then that's an entirely different thing. An advanced degree probably doesn't matter.
You mentioned call to adventure. So, Joseph Campbell, for those that are not familiar with his work on this show, we got to definitely change that. Some amazing books, and you've been working through that with your career. I want to remind the audience, advising founders, CEOs, helping them mature into their roles in
Yeah.
organizations of all sizes. So, where has that call to adventure, the hero's journey, fallen in? But I guess, firstly, what is it, and why
Yeah.
is it important to take notice of that?
Yeah. So Joseph Campbell was a renowned professor who studied mythology and came out and said that, wherever, whatever mythology he studied from whatever part of the world and cultural background or religious background or whatever, there was this common thread when they told the story of a hero, right? And I won't go into great details, but they all go through the same thing. There's this kind of this call to action where they feel this urge to leave everything behind and really follow this path, this vision that they have. And along the way they bump into mentors that can kind of help them refine this vision and move forward. They all seem to have a pattern where they hit some level of challenge, like in Joseph Campbell's approach. He calls this the arena of the abyss, right? So
Mm,
Joseph Campbell was actually um, worked with George Lucas on the Star Wars trilogy, right? Um, you know, you remember when there was that point in the movie where Luke Skywalker was just, in this literal darkness and had to kind of figure his way out and came to grips with his own fear and
mm.
figured out how to move out of that abyss. Well, that's the same thing that a CEO founder ultimately goes through is, the product's not working or the people are leaving or I have to pivot and do something else. And it's a test on their character. And if they come out successfully, then they're transformed, right?
Mm.
They're a new person, a more powerful person, and they're able to kind of come through that and complete the journey, complete the mission, and then move on to even greater things.
Role, if at all, in your view, does having a coach
Yeah,
play in this
yeah,
navigation of call to adventure, the
yeah,
the descent, the rise, right?
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think, um, and this is Uh, one thing that I think the CEO founder community appreciates is really the role and the value of having a coach, right? Because you need a safe place to go to kind of air out these concerns, to hear yourself think, to be able to have someone, reflect back to you what you're thinking, to ask a deeper question that may have you think even deeper and
Mm.
um, and really help the multiple transitions and behavioral changes that a leader has to go through to be successful in this, you know, really challenging world.
Yeah, it makes. I just thought this. I'd love your feedback on everything we talked to at this point. If we're going to have a more empathetic, compassionate, psychologically safe environment as a consequence of more emotionally intelligent leadership, then everyone in positions of authority, them having coaches or them having people holding them to account in a
Yeah,
respectful way or helping them
yeah,
think makes a lot of sense. Maybe in the past,
yeah,
not everyone would have had one or, in
yeah,
quotations, need one, because if I could kind of get away with disrespecting my people because they had no other options. And
yeah,
obviously, like there's levels of disrespect, right? I could just be a little mean that day in my tone, but
yeah,
that might not be I'm just thinking about this right now. You say to have
yeah,
more compassion, empathy, it wouldn't
yeah,
be so surprising that
yeah, and
because
and
not
that's
everybody wants a coach. Like
yeah,
I've come across lots of entrepreneurs on the show too that
yeah,
they'd rather be still in the cave,
yeah, yeah.
or
Well,
or in
yeah, and some
the
people,
tower, like Batman. Yeah, who's Batman's coach? He's more of like he has more of a with the older gentleman that gives him the weapons. That's
yeah,
not a
yeah, yeah,
coach.
yeah. He's
That's
not. Yeah,
more
he's definitely not. Yeah,
no.
I forget his name.
So
But
yeah, curious your thoughts on that.
yeah. Yeah, well, the first thing you kind of mix in sort of the accountability aspect of it, and having a coach. It's not just about being free to express yourself or air out ideas. It's also there's an accountability element to it, right? So when I start a process, I usually start with a 360 interview and I'm helping the leader sort of see how they're perceived, right? Both in like the signature strengths, what are your real superpowers that people love, and then what are your blind spots? Where can you be even more effective? And and so then we set on a course to change a couple of key behaviors, right? You can't take everything on. And and then the process is almost like hiring a trainer, right? So you're working on new muscle groups, and there's an accountability that happens during that process where you make a commitment at the end of a session with a coach that, in a week or 2 weeks time, you're going to have to face the coach again and say either I did it or I didn't, right? So it becomes kind of
Mm.
a motivating
Hard to
factor.
lie to yourself with that.
Exactly. Exactly. Um, so um, So yeah, so that's very much in the mix of helping people really kind of commit to the change that is better for them and better for the organization.
For those that are listening, they're looking to, they're in positions of authority. They have a business, the responsibilities. It's more than it was a year ago, 5 years ago. What questions should they be asking, or how should they be approaching interviewing for a coach? Because I'm pretty, I've been scrolling on Instagram and I saw a handful, some in their early 20s, some in their teens, some in their
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
50s, some, 30 to 3,000 employees.
Yeah.
Some I'm not sure, but they seem like great speakers, right? There's a lot of
Yeah.
so what
Yeah.
questions can we ask, or ways to do due diligence in your
Yeah,
estimation?
so yeah, it is kind of the Wild West still in terms in the coaching industry. I mean, one thing I would look for is really someone who is credentialed or certified, right? So there are a number of organizations that certify coaches and not a lot, but a handful of really reputable universities that now do that work. Like I got my graduate certification from Columbia University, and I think Georgetown has a program, and Berkeley has a program now,
Wow.
and so look to see that someone has actually gone through the rigorous process of learning how to be a good coach. And I found it's really a really different mindset than being a leader, and one that I had to learn.
Yeah, were you surprised after having all that? Because you did it, if I remember correctly, like 2 decades plus into your experience actually
Yeah,
working and building
it
companies.
was 3 decades. So
Yeah, so was that like mind, was that revelatory for you in the sense of doing that program that
yeah, yeah, I felt like as a leader um I was an active listener, but I knew I had to make a decision at the end of the day, right? I could listen, I could ask questions or whatever, but ultimately I had to decide, right?
Mm,
So as a coach, you have to kind of, that's not your job, is to get the client to
yeah.
decide,
Yeah,
right?
that's huge difference.
And
Wow.
I feel sorry for some of my early clients because it was more like a lecture than it was was a coaching session. Because you want to say, well, if you just do this, then you'll be fine, right? And my experience is this, and that's wrong-headed. Um, because again, the most powerful thing is to get the client to really kind of adapt a strategy that's right for them.
Mm.
Yeah.
So just you had to decide when you were in the position of authority to make the decision that would be that leader. But as the coach, you're a feedback loop helping them ultimately make that decision. But in the beginning of your career, you were going to operate from that same operating system. And that was a huge culture shock in a sense that the education really helps make that happen.
Yeah,
It makes
yeah, yeah,
perfect sense to
because
me.
because you
Yeah.
you get to practice that and you do it in
Yeah.
front of people who have done that
Wow.
and are skilled at that and they film you and then they point out how you missed an opportunity here. You could have asked a question or you
It
let the
makes me
client.
think, what could be some of the consequences of the wrong coach in the sense that maybe their heart's in the right place, but their operating system
Yeah. Yeah.
is in
I
the
mean,
it,
you
you
know,
know?
it is very much um, it is a personal choice, that same way you might select any other, you might select a psychologist or you might select a guitar teacher or, someone that you just kind of feel like, okay, this person is going to be right for me because,
Mm,
maybe you have somebody who is a self-starter that doesn't need a lot of, kind of pushing, if you will, to make an action, right? So you might have somebody who fits well with that person because they lean to be supportive. And then you have somebody else who, you have a client who just wants to give lip service but not really hold themselves accountable. And you might seem need someone who is going to kind of grab you by the lapels, if you will, and say, you know what, you're just fooling yourself and you're wasting my time. So, you try to kick them into doing some action. So it's definitely a thing like when you're connecting with someone,
mm.
right? Um,
One thing I want to circle back to about earlier was about the the people of our time, the employees of our time. They're purpose driven. They're seeking that purpose, and we especially saw that in the recent years. How do we give them that purpose, as we move to close? What are some ways to give that purpose or create that purpose that you think our listeners need to think about?
yeah, the purpose needs to be greater than the individual, right? And it needs they need to feel like they're and not always, but in most cases they need to feel like, okay, this is like a really lofty goal that I'm making an impact in society and in the world, right? And and it can be, it can be a service industry related. It can be, okay, well, we're providing entertainment for people to really enrich their lives or help them along the way. Um, and and uh, so it needs to be, kind of lofty and something that again is purposeful. And and then it's up to the individual to either align with that purpose or say, that's nice, but it's not for me. I'd rather do something in a different area.
Have that lofty goal, live up to it in actions to build the team. You need trust,
Yeah.
innovation, see where the puck is going.
Yeah.
And for that, you've got to be engaged more than
Yeah.
just one thing I'd like to know is what's worked for you in your career and what you've seen of your best clients as they've grown these companies in how to let people go in ways that are psychologically safe or in ways that actually work or some way the best practices in that
Yeah. Yeah, somewhere along the line, I learned about kind of these four quadrants, right? There's people um, who are team oriented and they're aligned with the purpose and the strategies of the organization, but they're just not doing the job well, right? So for them, you you try to help them, right? Help them get better at doing the job, right? There's another quadrant of people who are team oriented and they're star performers, and of course those are easy because you can promote them and bring them bring them along, right? And then there's the quadrant of people who just they're not team oriented, they suck at their job, and that's another easy
uh,
decision where you just move them on. And then there's the more complicated one of the people who are star performers, but they're not team oriented and they're not aligned with the purpose of the organization. And those you really have to swiftly show them the door, right?
So they're not team oriented. They're not aligned with the culture.
Right.
They might be star performers.
Yeah, they're killing it. They're bringing in revenue, but they're cultural cancer. You have to you have to make that tough decision and get rid of them quickly.
Is
And
that why they came up with Rico? I'm thinking from a company standpoint, right? We have our country, right? We all pay taxes, some don't.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Team-oriented stars promote them
yeah,
because
absolutely.
they believe in the team, they believe in the vision, mission, values, like you said, they represent
Yeah,
the values.
yeah,
You try to figure out how to bring them up like you did from 30
yeah,
to 3,000.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then you said there's those that could believe in the team, they believe in the mission, vision, maybe they even represent values, but they don't know what they're doing at the level that they
yeah,
could. So
yeah,
you're providing the resources. And then
yeah, yeah,
you said
yeah. I
one
mean,
is, or go ahead, Dan.
to complete, I think the answer to your question, um, you know, it's hard to fire somebody, right? It's hard to have that.
Yeah, I'm thinking the one that doesn't align, or the
Yeah,
one that does align, but they really stink, and then you feel bad for them. How do you
yeah,
address that? Sorry to interrupt.
yeah,
I
yeah.
see
No,
that a lot. I see that a
no. I
lot.
mean, if you put in the effort, you gave them the resources, and they're just not up for the job, then obviously that's really an awful decision. But you also have to think about the effect that allowing that person to stay is having on the rest of the organization, right? Because they know that you're keeping someone who is not up to your standards.
I
And
that could turn the person that was the star that was aligned, that did believe in the country or the company, to just
yeah,
check out and then start to
exactly.
go.
They're like,
They're
wait a minute,
connected in a way. Yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
I'm
Why would
killing
I yeah, why would I go get a job when I just keep doing this illegal thing?
it. Yeah,
Or what, well, why would I pay my tax when I don't believe in the road or whatever,
yeah.
like, so I'm just curious, like, 'cause I drew the quadrant, very, very, very helpful. I haven't,
Oh,
I've
nice.
never heard of that way. I love this. I'm going to use this. It's live.
Yeah.
So this is a really amazing quadrant. I love
I don't think
quadrants.
I don't think I've ever had it written on paper, so you have to share that with
I
me.
can think I will, you come back anytime. I can think of, I love thinking in quadrants. It's
Yeah,
very
yeah, yeah,
helpful way to look at it.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
what are your thoughts on that? There's that person that almost like I feel bad because they do care. I think they do like the company. They do like it, but it's
yeah,
not getting done. Like, I'll do it next week. I'll do it next month.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What
So
what effect could that have on the company? Because this is
yeah,
just,
no,
these are our
yeah,
listeners.
I think we talked about it. There's there's the people that are around them that if you do dedicate the resources and do try to help them and they just aren't able to cut it, then if you don't make that tough decision, then it reverberates and it says, oh, well, there's a tolerance for poor performance here, so I can slack off, right?
Mm. But one final question I had for today would be, did you have um, a word that you'd say would represent 2025 for, because we did our New Year's Jubilee on the podcast where guests come on the show all day and we talk about our words for
Oh yeah, yeah,
2024,
okay.
our words
Okay.
for 2025.
Yeah.
Mine's intensity. I want to do a lot more of these shows and a lot, like,
Yeah.
yeah, if you have a word for 2025, if you do share it,
I
if you
do,
do.
and actually I had one and then I changed it. So so I uh my first word was maximize,
Wow.
right? And I went to that because, it was actually we did a workshop with when I was at Sony, we had an outside consultant and we went through that, you know, what's your mantra? And maximize was mine, right? Because I wanted to maximize performance, the experience of the employee, and all of that. But I started to rethink that, just last week actually, and now for me it's mastery.
Mastery. Wow.
Yeah. So I want to um, be a master at this craft, at this career that I'm in now, which is, really helping leaders become masters and become and to maximize their
Mm,
performance. So that's a focus of mine, and that mastery continues in other areas of my life. I want to have that mastery component as a parent. Even though my kids are adults now, I still want to be there for them and do that in a way that's impactful and meaningful. And behind me, it sits a couple of guitars that I've
wow.
been plucking away at for decades, and I want to um, move from being an intermediate player to becoming a master player.
Wow.
So
Uh, Final, our listeners that are interested in connecting with
yeah,
you and the
yeah,
David Bishop Group,
yeah,
what's the best way to get in contact? They want to bring you into their
yeah,
auspices, their
yeah.
organization to level them up.
So you can connect with me at David at thedavidbishopgroup.com. Just send me an email, or if you go into LinkedIn and look up David Bishop, you can connect with me that way, or reach out to you, Jay, and I'm sure
Oh,
you'll
absolutely.
I'm sure you'll send them my way. So
Yeah, this is amazing. I'd love to have you back sometime. And I got to give a shout out to if anyone's listening to this episode and they've come with us on this quest, go listen to episode 291 and you can meet our mutual friend Norman Rosenthal, who introduced us. He was
yeah,
amazing. Go listen to that. Funny story, met him on a plane going to Miami, and the rest is history. We've been very
yeah,
close
and
ever
I can
since.
add to bring it all full circle. Norman is my coach.
He's amazing. That is
Yeah,
amazing.
he's a great
I would
guy.
challenge everyone to listen to and buy all his books. He's got like 11 amazing books,
Yeah,
and he's something special. So
yeah,
thank you all for listening. I would challenge you to email David Bishop, follow that, and please leave us a review on the Culture Matters podcast. Share this with someone maybe you previously worked for that could really use some self-awareness. Or a friend that wants to take their business to the next level. And we will see you next time on the Culture Matters podcast. Thank you so much.
all right. Thank you, Jay.